Hi guys. I wanted to take a little bit of time today to do a quick write along. That means that I'm going to kind of write about the sources the way that I would write about them, and you can follow along. Now, I want to say one thing before I start is that there are many, many ways to write about our sources. And so, I'm going to show you like one approach that works for me and my sources. um, because of the way that I thought about them. So before you get started, following the way that I do it exactly may not work for your sources. So what am I talking about? What do I mean? Let me go ahead and share my screen. Um, and what I mean by that is that, sometimes we have to think about what is it that we want to do with our sources, and that will change the way that we present them. For example, if I have sources that are more different than the same. So I have sources that are different. I might focus my entire page of discussion talking about those differences. So I might, talk about my first source, then my second, then focus on really discussing the differences between them. That's like one way to set up that discussion. But maybe I have sources that I want to connect. So then I'll, instead of talking about the differences, I might focus on discussing the connections between the two. Or I might, do it very differently. I might discuss my two sources together, connect them, and then talk about my connections to their ideas with specific quotes. Or I might talk more about how they connect to the world, right? So discuss my first source and how it connects to the world. I might discuss my second source and how it connects to the world again, or to me, right? And so it's like a puzzle that you make, like a collage of your own, right? You have to figure out like how you're going to do it. Even thinking about which source you're going to talk about first matters, right? So do you, depending on what you want to do you want to talk about things in general? Are you trying to define an idea and then give examples of an idea? Some people might organize their sources that way if that's how you have them. So you might say the first source I talk about explains the big idea, and the second source provides an example that I will connect to myself, right? So before you get started, figure out how you want to organize your writing. And then when you look at my write along, you can really try to figure out, my write along will basically help you kind of say like, oh, how can I talk about these things? But Bonnie's structure makes sense for Bonnie's argument and Bonnie's paper. And your structure might need to look a little bit different. And that's okay. You do not have to follow my specific structure. I think everyone is going to have a slightly different arrangement of sources and what they do with them, right? I like doing a lot of personal collections, but you might like a lot more like world connections or connections between the two sources. So do what works for you. I'm going to try to model as much variety as I can for you guys today. So I'll talk to you guys about some of the things that I like to do. And then I'll ask you guys as I do things, I'll pause and see how you want to do them, right? So one of the first things I like to do is I already have my introduction written elsewhere. I like to think of this section as its own chapter, and each chapter has its own like mini introduction. So I personally like to kind of introduce my audience to my sources. So before I even get into talking about my sources, I'll do like a few sentences where I just talk about like what's the overall topic I'll be discussing in this particular section. To do that, like I'm trying, oh, what I forgot what my sources were about. And that's okay. I have my annotated bibliography, my notes, which is gonna be super helpful for me today because I already did all the work last week collecting information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these sources are. I'm going to have to reread what they were about again. Now I don't have to read the source again because I already did my little like versions of what they're about. So this will just help me remember. So I'm gonna pause for a minute as I read to refresh my mind about what my sources are before I get started. All right, so I refreshed my mind over all the stuff that I was talking about, and really what I'm looking at as reading strategies specifically in the nursing field. So that's what my overall topic will be about. So when I write my little introduction here, I'm just going to kind of introduce those concepts. I might even talk about my own personal connection to just reading as a nursing student, if I was a nursing student. So I'll say, as a nursing student, I've come to realize, this is my little introduction before I get into the source. It's kind of it's helping me explain to my reader, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about next in this next section. That reading is incredibly important. To better understand both reading and how nurses engage in reading, I decided to explore a variety of research articles. I discovered that while both students and nurses engage in reading, there are some key differences between the way they read and the reasons why. Okay, so I've set myself up to introduce what I'm about to talk about with my two sources. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to let you guys think about, do you guys want to create like a little mini introduction to what you'll be talking about? Before you even do this little introduction, you might want to think about, how do you want to organize your information? That way you're able to introduce it to your readers easily, right? Will you be talking about key ideas? Will you be discussing connections? Will you be discussing differences? Like mine is set up to discuss differences, if you notice. So I'm preparing my readers to like, okay, in the next little sections, when she talks about her sources, she's going to be talking about the differences between them. So let's take a break here. Let's pause. And I want you to think about how you want to introduce your sources. It doesn't have to be very long. Notice that mine is only like 2 or 3 sentences long. So how do you want to introduce your sources? What do your readers need to know about how you'll be, what you'll be talking about the sources and how you'll be talking about them? So I'm going to pause here and let you do your thing. And when you're ready, unpause the video and continue along with me. Okay, guys, hopefully you got a little kind of tiny introduction, and don't worry about how perfect it is or anything like that. Even if it's like really dry, like I will be doing research, discussing these two sources about this, and that's fine, right? You can always go back and like make it a little bit more playful if you want later on, but don't be afraid to just kind of be really, really clear and about what you're doing as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring in my sources. So I need to think about how I want to organize them. And I like the idea of starting with like what students do, because that's the more familiar. I want to think about my readers. I'm like, everybody has been a student at some point. So looking at student reading habits might be the first thing to talk about. Or, you know, like it's easier to talk about because everyone has some familiarity with it. So I think I'll start with that article. And if I go back to my citations here, I have that information. So I'm going to be talking about Karen Maturin's reading value, student choice and reading strategies. So that's the one I'm going to be talking about first, I think. Sometimes people will talk about them together. I think I'm going to separate them, talk about them individually, and then discuss their differences. So I know it's going to be an article or a research article, and I'm probably going to just take this information as my summary. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Karen Maturin. So let's see, how do I want to do this? Let me go back. So I'm going to start with my first source. In her research article titled, I'm just going to go copy paste it, because I mean, I've already done all the work, right? So this is the title of the article. Control C. Let me go back. Her research article titled, okay, I don't want it to be bold. Let me just do it unformatted. Perfect. Karen Maturin Manorin claims that, and I guess I give like a quick overview of it. It's her biggest claim. That using, I like the bottom part, that using, okay, so I might use this, like this idea that I have here, like it's like the things I think people need to know about it. Claims that students claims that using our experiences to help us understand a reading is a good strategy, but it's not the only way to read. All right, so I kind of give a quick overview. I like kind of giving a quick little information before I get into like the nitty gritty of it. Now I know I might want to talk a little bit about who Karen Mannarin is. Like when I think about my readers, I think like they're going to be like, hey, who is this person? Why are we talking about this person? So maybe I need to do a little bit of a discussion of what gives this person credibility before I get into it. Maybe I need to rephrase this. I start off with Karen Mannarin. And then what is she? Let's go back. I have my credibility stuff down here so I can talk a little bit about who she is. Professor of literacy at the University of Mount Royal in Canada. Oh, I like, okay, I think I'm gonna start like that instead. I like starting with like telling my audience who these people are, like what gives them credit so that they believe it. They're gonna be like, most of my readers are gonna be like, wait, why are we talking about this source? Why should we listen to this person? Why do you, Bonnie, care about what this person has to say? Studied her own students' reading habits in her research article titled, oh, and now I came in a slightly different way because I wanted to talk a little bit about who the person was. And so I'm going to go back now. I'm going to take the title of it. I think this reads a little bit better. Control C. Then I go back and I'm going to paste in the title. Oops, wrong place. And now I can kind of give like a quick like explanation of the whole article if I wanted to. So I might say studied. I might just take what I said over here for my summary. The source is about, I'm going to have to definitely change how that's written, but I'll go in there and I'll change it. Control C. I'm going to go back since I already did the writing. I'm just going to take this and actually it's over here. And now I'm going to give a summary. Ooh, let me go back. I don't want it all bold. So Karen Mannarin, a professor of literacy at the University of Mount Royal in Canada, studied her own students' reading habits in her research article titled Reading Values, Student Choice, and Reading Strategies. So I don't like the way that this sounds anymore. This source is about, so I want to name my author, right? So Mannarin claims that the reading strategies students use most, oh wait, no. Mannarin, so that doesn't make sense. The reading was about Mannarin's article, Mannarin's research focused on the reading strategies students use most. The author, I'll just replace that with Mannarin. Mannarin investigated, oops, I guess I thought it was a man. It's her own students' reading logs and discovered, let me fix these like spelling errors. And then I'm just looking at what I've already put in here, right? So I already wrote this before. Discovered that most students used imagery and relating to the reading relating their own experiences to the reading to understand the reading. A major idea and discovery was that even when students were taught new strategies for reading, they would always go back to using imagery or relating to personal experiences or relating their reading to their personal experiences. So I'm just making some quick changes that make it sound a little smoother, a little nicer as I'm reading it. College expects students, I'm going to go in here. Maturin claims that college expects students to read for authors' intentions, but students fall back on using their own experiences to determine whether reading is right or wrong. So there's a nice summary. So we have me explaining, introducing the author, explaining their background, what gives them credibility. I introduce the title of the research, and then I kind of quickly sum up the research. And I use this by simply talking about what is the source about and what are some of the main ideas or discoveries in the source. I could talk about the research that she did, which I kind of briefly did. I could go into more detail if I wanted to. But for now, I think I'm good. I'm not sure that I necessarily want to. It says it here kind of briefly. If I wanted to, I could go into more detail, but I think I'm going to leave it as is. So here's what I said that I think readers need to know. I might use this. Actually, I think I'll use that. I'm going to copy paste it over. I might rephrase it so it sits better in my writing, but I like that. Kind of me just kind of explaining. Instead of people need to know, I'll say it's important to know that using your experience to understand a reading is okay, but it should go beyond that to consider author's intentions as well. And now I can think about how maybe I connect to this reading to kind of further explain it. When we build connections, we help our readers better understand that reading as well. So not only is the connection helping us understand what we're doing, but the connection also helps the readers better understand the reading. So I think, I don't know if I want to do a connection and then go into a quote and then kind of start to maybe test that quote, because I've done some of the things, right? I've mentioned the author's name. I've been using the word claim, investigated claims. I'm using that word as much as I can. Yeah, let me go back and see if I want to. I could use quotes here, but I know I want to deal with these quotes later on when I do a discussion about the differences. Yeah, I think I'm going to work instead with my connections. So connections to me and my experience. How does it answer my question? I might use this, right? But then make a connection to myself. So I might take this one. And I'm just going to put it in there, but I'm going to have to rewrite it a little bit. So I'm going to paste it in there and see if I can rewrite it. As I read, I realize that I am just like this author students. So I realize that I am just like this author. I guess I'm going to name her, right? Karen Maturin's students. I'm pretty good at connecting my own experiences to my readings, to the things I read for college, and using my experiences to determine whether a source is good or bad to use in my writing, but I rarely or almost never think about what the author intended for his audience. Kind of a selfish reading approach. I'm thinking I'm explaining it a lot, but maybe I need to share a personal story of when this happened to me. Sorry, I'm trying to move my mic around while also being able to type at the same time. I'm specifically reminded of the time when I was reading for my for one of my master's classes. And I was asked to discuss the reading. My first response was to connect it to my personal experience. And I ended up sharing a lot about how I had experienced similar issues teaching. I guess I need to explain what the reading was. Reading for my master's class, when I was reading about how to teach first year composition for one of my master's classes. So it happened to me too, even at a higher level. I found myself being not talking about the author's intentions, but just focusing on my personal experience. I failed to consider the author's intentions or his purposes, and simply began to relate to the article or the reading to understand it. It was my default approach. So here I've talked about Mandarin and her ideas. I've made a connection. I even got a little bit more specific with my connection. And look at all that I've written so far. And I only do a page, and I've only written about one source so far. So now I can go into maybe I pick out a quote, but I want to deal with my quotes later on in my last paragraph. What can I do next? I guess I can evaluate it. Right, so we can test it. I can test this idea. So here I was making a connection, but maybe if now I start to think about, is Mandarin correct? So I want to talk about that. I built my connection that relates to it. But is this always the case? Let me think. Like what I'm thinking now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm changing the way I'm thinking, and I'm going to be writing about whether whether my experiences prove Mandarin correct or incorrect. And I have to think about this carefully, because I'm kind of just defaulting into saying, yeah, me too. But have I experienced maybe other things where I don't fall in line with Mandarin's ideas? Or can I prove her correct? So I might change my phrasing here a little bit. I have my connection, my experience. I think Mandarin's ideas or Mandarin's claims, what's the word I can use? Mandarin's claims are correct, are on point here. As I reflect on my own, I realize a lot of my reading, my own go-to reading strategy is first and foremost relating to the reading. I'm going to go ahead and support her claims. And so I did it with one sentence, because the last kind of like little explanation, I can use that to further support her ideas. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to move on to my next reading. I guess before I do that, I want to give you time. Now that you've seen me write about a paragraph about one source, I want to give you the opportunity to write about your source. So I'm going to pause it here, but some things to think about as you write about your own is, you want to name your author. You may even want to give some background information about your author. Do you want to tell us about their credibility? Which, remember, you have all this information in your annotated bibliography. So do you want to tell us, you want to name the author, you want to introduce the title of the article that they wrote or the chapter that they wrote, you want to tell us a little bit about who they are, what makes them credible, you want to tell us a little bit about the whole article, right? What is this article about? What were the main ideas or key discoveries? What was the research about? You might want to make a connection, discuss how you relate to the article, or maybe how you're relating the article to the world or to another source if you want. Get specific, get more detailed on that connection. And you might also want to try to figure out whether the claims that the author are making make sense or not. So evaluate those claims, test those claims against your own experience, and write a couple of sentences that kind of have you saying, you know what, I think that this claim is pretty valid, or I don't find the validity in this claim. When I think about it, it's very different from what I've seen and experienced. Either way, go ahead and try to do those things with one of your sources. And then when you're done, come back and we'll try it again with the second source. Okay, so hopefully you got some writing done. I'm gonna try writing my next source in. My next source is is more focused on the major that I'm interested in. I just pretending to be interested as a nursing major, but that's what I'm going for. So I'm a nursing student, and my second source is more focused on reading the reading that nurses do. So not really nursing students, but I think it's a half answer and I can probably use this. So I'm going to come over here and look at what I wrote. This is Rebecca Ingram Broomfield, A Nurse's Guide to Critical Reading of Research. I think I'll do the same thing that I did for the other source. I kind of introduce the author and then the source. Or maybe I need to find a way to kind of like slowly introduce a little bit better. While Karen Manarin explored the reading that students do, Rebecca Ingram Broomfield focuses specifically on the reading strategies and habits of nurses. Ingram Broomfield. So what I did here, guys, is I'm trying to move between these two. Now, I could just mention the author and gone right into it. But when you think about how shocking that is, like for our readers, nobody likes to just get sources thrown in their face. Like, here's a source, here's a source. We always want to guide our readers to them, between them. So for me, I was like, I can't just throw in the next source without preparing my readers for it. So I'm doing like a little transition, kind of moving from this source into the next one with this sentence right here that kind of guides my readers between the two and lets my readers know what I'm doing. Ingram Broomfield, let me go get, now I want to kind of give my audience a sense of like her credibility. So let me go get that information down here. He's a professor of literacy at the University of Royal Canada. Sorry. This is, I switched them. She's a lecturer in nursing at the University of New England in Australia. Her writing references several sources of information when she discusses her ideas behind how and why to develop resources. All right. And I like what I was saying. I think I like knowing she's an educator and her ideas are supported by researcher. So I might introduce her like that. Let me copy paste what I have and I'll see how I can mess with it. Is an educator and lecturer. An educator and lecturer in nursing at the University of New England and Australia. Her writing references several sources of information that explain how to develop useful resources, useful reading resources for nurses. In her article titled, and I'm going to bring in the source that I'm talking about. Let me go back over to here. I'm going to go all the way up for this title, A Nurse's Guide to Reading of Research. I'm gonna go back to my essay and I'm gonna put in the title there, paste. I'm gonna put Ingram Broomfield. Let's go see. I'm probably gonna do the summary now. Talks about I copy paste all this and I'm going to mess with it and try to get it to fit in smoothly in my next one. So if you notice, I've done something very similar. I made a transition into this. Then I introduced who the author was, gave some background to her credibility to kind of let my audience know why we're going to trust this source, why it's a valuable source. Then I introduce the article, and now I'm going to give my audience a summary. I like to give my audience a sense of this is what the whole article is about before I get into the specifics of it. In her article titled A Nurse's Guide to Critical Reading and Research, talks about or explains how nurses and midwives in Australia struggle reading research. She claims, or Ingram Bloomfield claims, it's important for nurses, I don't know why he writing nurses to read and understand new research, to understand new approaches and practices in their field. That's too big of a sentence. Let me go. However, because of the complex words and ideas in a lot of research articles, nurses really struggle with it. The author suggests, here's another place where I can say Ingram claims, or Ingram Bloomfield claims that creating resources that provide nurses with the strategies to read, like rhetorical reading and critical reading strategies, can help nurses improve their reading abilities and engage in the reading that is crucial for their own professional development. And there, I said, I think I'm going to keep this. I think nursing students, this is my audience, I think nursing students need to be aware of the fact. I need to be aware, I don't want to say fact, be aware that reading is hard at all points in the nursing profession. And even nurses are always learning and needing to learn better ways to read. Even nurses, with all their experience, still need to learn better ways to read. All right, I like that. So this is just me kind of explaining the source. And now I want to get into some nitty-gritty of it. I can make connections to it. I can try to prove it right or wrong. I'm going to focus on really thinking about Ingram Bloomfield's claim here that nurses need to continue learning to read, and that they need strategies to do that they're not always strong readers. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see if I can prove that claim correct. Or I could argue against it. I think she might be making assumptions that not all nurses are strong readers. And then of course her solution is resources, that resources alone will help. I don't know if resources alone will help. Maybe that's how I'll start. I don't know, however, if resources alone are the best solution to helping nurses improve their reading. While having resources available can definitely be helpful, without a teacher or someone to help nurses understand how to use those resources, it may be daunting or challenging for nurses. And I like this. Like, I'm actually going to push back on this a little bit. I agree with what she's saying in a lot of the parts. Like, I can understand like why she's saying, oh, we need to have that reading is important for nursing. But then she says that the solution is just have resources available. I was like, but that's fine. Like, I can have a book available to me and I can read that book and not learn a damn thing, because it's not just about reading it. It's about having someone there to help you understand how to use it. And this, I have experience with this, right? Like, I've taken lots of classes, and some of the worst classes I've ever taken are the ones where kind of I'm left to like figure it out on my own. I don't like that. Maybe it works for some people, but not all people. And I'm going to talk about that. As a student myself, I remember being in classes where everything was available to us online, but it was on us, the students, to use those resources, to learn from them, and to essentially learn on our own. It was on us, the students, to figure out how to use those resources and to learn on our own. There is nothing wrong with learning on your own, but it is much tougher. I think Ingram Broomfield is on to something when she says nurses need resources, but she really fails she really drops the ball when she ends it on resources alone. I think she needs to consider the importance of instruction and having someone available to help nurses use the resources and understand the reading strategies she's recommending. So I actually pushed back a little bit on that one. I said, I like her idea. Her final discovery was like, oh, we need to have nurses need to have access to reading strategies and reading resources so that they can become better readers. And I said, yeah, you know what? Yes, that's part of it, but that's not the only thing. I think, I've had my own experiences where I'm having to like learn things on my own and it just doesn't work for me. And I think that for this to be really effective, it needs to go beyond just having resources to having people available to instruct and help students or nurses that are trying to learn to be better readers. And so that's what I talked about here. You'll see I'm already at well over a page just talking about these two sources. I haven't even done what I wanted to do, which is the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about the differences. And so I'll say what I found particularly interesting between these two researchers or authors' ideas was their definitions of reading. And now I'm going to come into it. So I'm going to start to I'm going to talk about both sources. In a way, I'm connecting them, but I'm actually going to be discussing the difference. So remember when we read about Roger and Janet, when she saw two sources that had differences, she just picked a side. She wouldn't really deal with it. And Roger would kind of say, oh, these two people, they have different ways of thinking. And I'm going to talk about why I think they have different ways of thinking. That's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to deal with the two different ways of thinking. And so I'm setting that up. was their definitions of reading. And so now I'm going to put, I'm here, Karen Mannering describes reading as, and I'm going to go ahead and take the quote that I had. I'm going to come over here. Where's my quote? Where's my quote? Here. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Tries reading as, and I'm going to paste this in. Whenever I quote, I make sure to include the page number and the author's last name. And my battery's about to die. Let me pause for a moment so that I can charge my computer, and I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. I had to recharge my laptop. So I'm introducing this quote here. So after quotes, I personally like to explain the quote a little bit to my audience. I don't like just throwing quotes at people without talking about it. And a lot of teachers, by the way, kind of expect you to explain your quotes. Why do teachers want you to explain the quotes that you're using in your essay? Because it shows that you understand the quote. So I encourage you guys, whenever you can, right after a quote, just explain it a little bit to your readers. So in this case, focusing on imagery allows the student to enjoy some of the reading experience, even in the context where the reading is required. Imagery is also associated with identity in usually positive ways. So here, Mannering claims that students enjoy some of the reading experiences. That when students are allowed to focus their reading on imagery and they are able to enjoy the reading and connect it to themselves. Reading is understood through their own experiences. When we imagine things, we relate them to what we already know. So I'm just kind of explaining the quote, right? So here, Mannering is really trying to get us to understand. Here, Mannering is trying to get us to understand that one way students read is through imagery that allows them to connect themselves to the reading. On the other hand, Ingram Brunfield claims that good reading is reading that is more critical. In her research, Ingram claims that, and I'm going to include the quote from Ingram here. And I'm going to admit, like, these are not my strongest quotes. As I'm reading them, I'm realizing, like, probably I could have selected stronger quotes, but that's okay. I'm playing with it. I'm practicing. I'll get better as I go along. I'm not worried in the least, because I know that what we're really doing here with Bonnie is we're playing research. So I'm going to do my best with what I got. I'm not going to over worry or overthink this. So here I have that critiquing is defined. Ingram claims that critique is defined as reading and examining the strengths and limitations of a published study. Similarly, critical appraisal is a term used to assess outcomes for evidence. There's a lot going on in this quote, and I know I'm going to have to explain this for my readers. Like, there's too much going on here. So it's my job to explain this to my readers. Here, Ingram Broomfield is making it clear that reading requires critical evaluation of research studies, where the reader can determine whether the research they are reading about is done well and can be applied. So there, I kind of explained it to my reader. Now I'm talking about the differences. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna deal with these differences, right? So if that had been like a student like Janet, I'd be like, oh, which is the right way? I guess I'll just pick a side. I'll side with Ingram, or I'll side with Mannering. But instead of picking sides, I'm going to talk about why I think that there are differences between the way that they are talking about reading. So I'll just talk about it, right? I'll just start saying it. Both these authors are talking about reading, but they have very different definitions for it. I think this is in large part because of the situations in which they are teaching reading. Because remember, they're both teachers, right? But they both define reading so differently. In Mannarin's case, she is just teaching reading for learning. But in Ingram Broomfield's case, she is teaching nurses to apply research to nurses' day-to-day jobs. I think both approaches to reading are important, as they both help with understanding, but it is important to know that reading strategies will change depending on the purpose for reading, right? So I didn't pick a side. I just started dealing with the differences. And I'll have to go in here and like edit it and that kind of thing. Clear situations. I'll fix those things later. And so now I'm kind of setting myself up to kind of conclude this little section. So I talked about Mannarin's ideas of reading. I talked about Ingram Bloomfield's ideas of reading, and then I dealt with a major difference. And now I know I'm going to head out to do my own interviews. So I might, end by talking maybe about some questions I still have, or some things that I'm still curious about. I began this research thinking about the kinds of reading strategies that would work for, or reading strategies that would work for nursing students. And while I've discovered a lot about the application of reading strategies for students and nurses, I'm still left wondering if there is what am I left wondering? I guess I'm wondering, like, is it not one or the other? Is it a combination of the two? Wondering if there is room for reading, is there's room for using our experiences to understand a reading as a nursing student, or even in the nursing field, right? And I might think about, well, what am I going to do next? Interviews, right? So as I move forward with my interviews, I think I'll ask some questions about how nurses or nursing students may use their own experiences to help them understand reading, and when they choose to be more critical or analytical with their readings. Yeah, so it's actually giving me some things to think about for my interviews. Like I might start asking questions about like, well, have you found yourself, or do you think nurses use experiences to relate to readings that they do as working nurses? How did they do that? I think those are interesting questions that might help me better understand, and I'll be able to come back and compare and contrast because maybe it's not one or the other. What if it's maybe a combination of all the things that I've learned? Maybe it's experience and critical analysis that make for good reading strategies for nursing students and nurses on the job. So I'm setting myself up to go there. So I've written quite a lot. A lot of this I had already written. Some of it came from my annotated bibliography. I'm sure I could have added more connections. I could have used probably a section where I could have answered the question here if I wanted, using my connections to answering the question. Some of it came in here, not all of it did, and that's okay. Play with what you want to use, what you want to put in here. Think of it as your own little puzzle piece to kind of make sense of stuff. And remember that as you write, you're actually learning things as you go. A lot of what I wrote down here today, I just discovered and just figured out. And that's part of the process. So I hope that this was helpful to see. I hope you got a chance to pause and kind of write with your own, or helped inspire you to kind of figure out how you want to write your own. I don't want you to overstress about it. Have fun with it. And like I said, turn it into like a little collage or a puzzle piece of stuff that you want to write around. And of course, if you need help, only a text message or an email away. So I will see you guys when I see you in class.